How about the response, your idea, especially in Malay, Singapore, or Indonesia? Because you thought in our discussion that we are alienated from our roots. Talking about roots, Malaysia have a root, Singapore has a root, Indonesia has a root. So it is part of burden or not? What do you think? And the response to your idea so far?
I think that I may speak of Indonesia, of Malaysia and Singapore especially, because I have experience teaching in Singapore and Malaysia. I think our institutions, our educational institutions, especially the universities, are still very Eurocentric in their orientation. The mainstream discourse is generally Eurocentric, and also we should add androcentric or male bias. There's little attention given to female founders of the social sciences. There's little attention given to the non-Western founders of the social sciences. So when we, it is expected that if we talk about Ibn Khaldun, for example, this should only be in a course on Middle Eastern studies, because Ibn Khaldun would not be seen
not part of
as
Western studies.
It would not be seen as part of mainstream studies. But when we study sociology, they teach Max Weber. They don't say Max Weber should be only part of European studies. Although Max Weber was from Europe and was writing mainly about European societies. Karl Marx was writing about capitalism in the West. But nobody says that Karl Marx is from European studies or is only relevant to European studies. So the Western or the European is equated to mainstream. But the Indonesian is seen only to be relevant to Indonesian studies. Ibn Khaldun is only seen to be relevant to Islamic studies or Middle Eastern studies or North African studies.
So it is a part of universal acceptance as academically.
It should be accepted. It should be considered of universal relevance and brought into mainstream discourse. And I think in Singapore and in Malaysia, we are still a very long way from being able to achieve this.
If you compare with Indonesian academic, what do you think about your opinion?
If I look at Southeast Asia in general, I think the country that is the most sensitive to this problem of Eurocentrism is the Philippines.
Why Philippines?
I think it has something to do with the fact that in the 19th century there was a figure like Jose Rizal, who was a very serious thinker and especially social thinker. He was not only involved in the agitation against the Spanish colonial regime, but he also taught in a very systematic way about colonial society. And he was the first to raise, probably in the third world, he was the first to raise the problem of the accusation that the natives are lazy people. And this had an influence on the work of my late father on his book on the myth of the lazy native, as a critique of colonial discourse about natives. So I think the work of Rizal, the presence of Rizal, had an impact on the consciousness of Filipinos about Eurocentrism. And then after the Philippines, I think Indonesia, we find there is more concern about this problem than in Malaysia or in Singapore. But in Indonesia, the issue was first raised by the Dutch scholars in the colonial period, who raised the issue of the need for a more Indo-centric interpretation of Indonesian history. It was first raised by them, but then by the also you have in the 19th century Indonesian activists such as Cokro Minoto, who were interested in Islam and socialism, but they did not simply want to import uncritically socialism from the West. They tried to Islamize socialism, so they spoke of Islamic socialism. So you have that kind of thinking.
Stigma?
Not stigma. I don't regard it as a stigma. I regard it as a positive development, you have a foreign idea like socialism, but they tried to relate it to Islamic society, to Indonesian society. So Cokroaminoto spoke about Islamic socialism. So this is a good attitude to want to let's say indigenize something that is foreign, because that is a very important part of the process to create local institutions and ideas in a creative manner. Because we cannot ignore what comes from the outside. For example, we accept, I think most Indonesians accept the idea of parliamentary democracy. Parliamentary democracy is based on foreign ideas, but it has been over the decades, and certainly since the fall of Suharto, it has been modified to suit Indonesian conditions. The same thing, the parliamentary system of Iran. They have a parliament, Majlis. The basic idea comes from Western parliamentary democracy, but it has been modified to fit the philosophy of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and they have combined it with other institutions that they themselves created.
Okay, say what makes you different? Because some of scientists said in Indonesia that you are the scientists in the line of Islamization. So what make you different with the Islamization of science, or just give perspective of Islam? What do you think?
No, I don't consider myself following the idea of Islamization of knowledge. I think you are referring to Islamization of knowledge. I don't consider myself part of that idea, that tradition, because I am not clear about what Islamization of knowledge means. I think the idea of Islamization of knowledge is a modern idea, and it is a reaction to Eurocentrism. It is a reaction to
scientism,
and a reaction to scientism. It is a reaction to the idea that the world is disenchanted. A reaction to secularism. It is not the reaction that I adopt, because I feel that when I look at, for example, at Ibn Khaldun was a sociologist. He called his science Ilm al-Ijtima al-Insani, the science of human society, which approximates sociology, so we can call him a sociologist. It is very clear in his work when he presents his science and he makes an argument for his new science that he does not regard this as an Islamic science. It is not part of the category of ulum al-naqliya. It is part of the category of ulum aqliya.
Yeah. What do you think about
intellectual science?
What do you think about Harun Yahya, Ibrahim Khalil, and other scientists? What do you think? Do you think that you have original thinking, or maybe new generation taking much from the Ibn Khaldun thoughts? What do you think? How do you identify yourself?
Okay, I identify myself as I've been influenced by, first and foremost, by my father, who spoke about the captive mind, fikiran terbelenggu, as he called it in Bahasa Indonesia, the captive mind which is dominated by mainstream Western discourse in an uncritical manner. So this is the whole problem of Orientalism. But I realized that my father's generation, many of the scholars of my father's generation, not my father himself, but the scholars of his generation and the scholars of my generation, were very preoccupied with the critique of Western knowledge, the critique of Eurocentrism, but they did not create new knowledge. They did not look into our traditions to create new concepts and theories. Whether it is Ibn Khaldun or Jose Rizal or Al-Biruni, it doesn't matter. But they didn't do that. They kept on criticizing Eurocentrism, but did not do the alternative theorizing, the alternative discourses. Even most of the Muslim scholars who studied Ibn Khaldun did not create a Khaldunian sociology. They just made the claim that Ibn Khaldun is the originator of sociology. But they did not make a modern Khaldunian sociology. And this is what I have tried to do. In my 2 books on Ibn Khaldun, especially the second book, Applying Ibn Khaldun, I speak in a systematic way about Khaldunian sociology.
Okay.
And this is my contribution.
Okay, your contribution. Okay, so the last question about the way, the methodology to promote our idea is not easy to way. Like if we refer to Syed Hussein Nasir, he always speak in public about similar parallelism, something like that, and anti-scientism. So, what do you think about your methodology to promote your idea? Like today that you bring some students from NUS to go to Indonesia, make dialogue. So how far or what is your real cost of your journey?
Having seminars and conferences and publishing papers and conducting study trips for students to raise consciousness about these ideas is very important, but it's not enough.
Not enough.
I think that all of us who are concerned with this problem have to go to another stage, and that stage is textbook publishing. We have to
produce textbook.
We have to produce textbooks which reflect a balance between Western mainstream discourse and our own traditional, our own discourse that is drawn from our tradition. So, for example, imagine if you have a textbook on social theory in Bahasa Indonesia for the universities in Indonesia for the course on sociological theory. Now, if you look today at textbooks on Indonesian, in Bahasa Indonesia on social theory, it is in Bahasa Indonesia, but what is the content? Marx, Weber, Durkheim, Zimmel,
Probably the same,
all the same, right? We should have a textbook, let's say, on original social theory. Yes, we should have Marx, we should have Weber, we should also have Ibn Khaldun, we should have Jose Rizal, we should have Binoy Kumar Sarkar, who was an Indian thinker 100 years ago, and so on and so forth. We should have Al-Biruni. Why, do we ignore? We should be more universal and cosmopolitan. The West and Indonesian, the West and the East. That's a cosmopolitan attitude that we should have. And we should not just talk about it, not just in conferences or seminars. We should start writing and publishing textbooks so that every year, hundreds or thousands of students will be exposed to these ideas. And for them, being cosmopolitan, not being Eurocentric, will be something normal for them.
Okay, Syed, thank you very much for your comment.
Thank you.